Good evening. As our attendees start to arrive, we will be starting in 3 minutes time. So bear with us, 7 o'clock we'll be starting and you're gradually all just arriving as attendees. This is a webinar and so you will be able to see the panelists, but you will not be able to see yourselves. So we'll just wait for everyone to attend and then we will start immediately at 7 o'clock. Thank you. Just to say, we will be starting at 7 o'clock. So in 2 minutes time, quickly grab a drink if you wish, and we will start at 7 o'clock. This is part of the CAGNY Time is Ticking series of webinars. This is number 2 on our natural world. Okay. Hello, Ray. How can I help?
Hi, Sally. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. How can I help?
Well, I'm joining in. I'm watching.
Okay, lovely. All right, that's fine, Ray. Do you want to put?
I'm not sure you can see my face, but who wants to anyway?
That's fine, Ray. Hello, Sarah. All right. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Time is Ticking. This is a series of webinars by CAGNY. That's a community group that concentrates on aviation and the environment. These talks have been put together due to Gatwick Airport's plans for a second runway. It's a series of environmental talks. This is talk number 2. The house rules fall to me this evening. We have put on the subtitles. You can stop these from your computer if you wish, but it obviously helps people with disabilities. All questions would you please put them in the question and answer function on your Zoom page. The questions will be taken by the chair this evening and put to our panelist. Now, we're delighted to welcome Sarah Ward of Sussex Wildlife Trust. Unfortunately, Sarah's been very poorly today, so we're very delighted that she's with us. But she's actually going to ask and not to attend the questions at the end of this session. So if you have questions, she's happy for you to email her directly, and the email address will appear at the end of her presentation, or send them to Cagney, and we will forward them on to Sarah after this session this evening. The session is being recorded and will be on our YouTube channel next week for those that are unable to attend this evening. I'm delighted that a Cagney committee member is chairing this meeting, Lisa Morris. She's been a long time campaigner, but she's also a very important lady in her real life. She's the CEO of a national charity. So I'm delighted that she's going to chair. It will be down to Lisa to control the meeting this evening. I'm purely here to monitor and help anybody that's having problems getting into this session or has any questions. If you want to reach me, please do that via the chat. Use the question and answers for questions for Charles Burrell and for Sarah Ward this evening. I'd like to thank Friends of the Earth for their support. They obviously allow us to use their Zoom account for these talks, and also CPRE, Sussex, Surrey and Kent, who have also supported these talks and this series of talks. We have an additional talk, which I must make you aware of, which is question time on Thursday, the 7th of October at 7 p.m. It's a virtual talk, and we have Gatwick Airport Management answering your questions. We also have a director of Aviation Environment Federation, and we also have the transport person for Friends of the Earth. So your questions can be put on the evening, or they can be sent in advance to Cagney via email address. And I have loaded the link for you to book in the chat to book to attend on the 7th. So without any to do, I'm going to pass over to Lisa Morris, and I'm now going to mute myself. And Lisa, thank you.
Lovely. Well, what a lovely introduction. I'm definitely here only as a doer tonight. There's many more people that know a lot more about our subject today, which is fabulous, and thank you. So as Sally said, my name is Lisa and I'm a committee member of Cagney, and it's my absolute pleasure to chair tonight's session, which is the second in the series of these virtual talks. Tonight's session is very much a subject close to my heart, and clearly a subject that's close to yours as well. So without much further ado, really, we want you to be involved in tonight's session. So it's going to be an interactive experience, and we warmly invite you to use the Q&A function to ask any questions throughout the session. The Q&A section will be later on in the evening, where we will answer a selection of the questions put in that Q&A, and we will ask the speakers specifically for their answers. So please do ask away, and we'll answer as many of those questions as we can later on. As Sally said, the session will end at 8. So without further ado, I welcome each and every one of you to the session, and I'm sure you'll join me in extending a very special welcome to our two expert speakers for tonight's session, Sir Charlie Burrell, owner and guardian of Knepp Castle, and Sarah Ward, Living Seas Officer from Sussex Wildlife Trust. So Sir Charles Burrell is the 10th Baronet, who studied higher national diploma in agriculture and advanced farm management at Cirencester Royal Agricultural College. Charlie inherited Knepp Castle in West Sussex from his grandparents in 1983, when he was in his early 20s. And despite intensifying the estate's arable and dairy business for some 17 years, farming on the heavy Sussex clay remained unprofitable. So his conversion to rewilding began after meeting the visionary Dutch ecologist Frans Vera, and an astonishing 3,200 acres of Knepp Castle are now devoted to a rewilding project involving free roaming herds of cattle, horses, pigs and deer as drivers of habitat creation. And since 2001, when this rewilding begun, numerous red data species have colonised Knepp, and populations of common species are rocketing. Knepp wildland is now a breeding hotspot for nightingales and turtle doves, which is just amazing given these species were to be extinct in the UK by 2020. And it has the largest breeding colony of purple emperor butterflies in the UK. The grazing animals provide 35 tonnes of organic pasture-fed meat per annum, which has turned into a lucrative low-carbon source of income for the estate. And wildlife tourism, including African-style safaris, is another key element of Knepp Castle. And Knepp Wildlands Advisory Board comprises of 22 eminent ecologists and conservationists, including John Lawton and Franz Vera. The success of this open-ended, low-cost landscape scale restoration project, where natural processes are allowed to perform, is now influencing thinking across the conservation world. In 2015, Knepp Wildland received the People Environment Achievement Award for Nature, and in 2017, the Anders Wall Award for special contribution to the rural environment within the European Union. And we're also very lucky to have Sarah Ward from Sussex Wildlife Trust. So welcome as well to Sarah. Sussex Wildlife Trust is a conservation charity for everyone who cares about the nature in Sussex. The trust focuses on protecting the wonderfully rich natural life that is found across our towns, countryside and coast. And by working alongside local people, Sussex Wildlife Trust create opportunities for us all to connect with nature and for nature to thrive in even the most unlikely places. And together the trust is striving to make sure that future generations living in Sussex will be able to enjoy the sense of wonder and well-being that nature offers. So really welcome both of our expert speakers to the floor tonight. And we're going to hand over to Sarah initially. And she's much more knowledgeable and interesting than I am, so as will Charlie be. So the quicker I hand over to the experts, the better. So Sarah, thank you very much and welcome. And I'll pass the floor to you.
Lovely, thank you so much. So I've got a presentation loaded here, so I'm just going to share my screen. Is that working? I think that's working. Cool, yeah, so thanks so much for inviting me along to speak tonight. It's really nice to have the opportunity, and this is actually this is the first time I've actually given a talk like this. It's quite a niche subject for me, and as was mentioned earlier, I've not been particularly well today, so hopefully I can do the talk some justice, and apologies that I'm not going to stick around for too long later, but I'm going to drag myself back off to sick bay, but at least the magic of technology, I can still be here and give the talk. But what I wanted to talk about tonight is our marine work and the fact in relation to the sort of topic at hand, the ocean being a massively important carbon sink, specifically things that are sort of pertinent to us locally, obviously being Sussex Wildlife Trust. We don't tend to concern ourselves too much with things on a global scale. But of course, things that we do locally can have massive knock-on effects, you know, nationally as well as internationally. So it's really, you know, no, we don't like to think too small, even when it comes to issues that are really quite fundamental global issues. So I thought I'd just introduce myself a little bit so you can understand a bit about my role, because a lot of people hear the term living seas officer and have no idea what it is that I do, and sometimes I don't really know what it is myself that I do. My job's very changeable and it's evolved a lot, even just in the 5 or so years that I've been in post. But fundamentally, it's kind of split into these 3 different groups. So marine conservation policy, which is very much sort of keeping an eye on developments at sea. Obviously, at the moment, I'm sure you're aware there's been the proposed extension to the Nepean wind farm. So that's just off the coast of Sussex. So that's something we're very much involved in terms of responding to consultations, engaging with processes, that kind of thing, to ensure development at sea is done in a sustainable way possible for the marine environment. We do a lot of marine advocacy and engagement to bring our coasts to life and help people understand that it's not just a big grey expanse when you look out to sea, that there's loads of really, really interesting things there, and obviously the importance of that environment. We also do quite a lot of citizen science, and that sort of forms what we would call the evidence base. My job sits within our conservation policy and evidence team. So by having some really fantastic volunteers to hand to help us collect that evidence, that obviously gives a bit more gumption, I suppose, to when we're actually doing things like our marine conservation policy. So it's all very much linked together. And as an individual, I, of course, am a wildlife lover. Who cannot be a wildlife lover when you work for a wildlife trust? I'm a bit of a science nerd. I did degrees in marine biology and marine conservation, so I do like to base everything, you know, that we do in science. And I'm a scuba diver myself, so I like to throw this picture in just to give you all a laugh at my expense. It's a few years ago now when I just bought myself a new dry suit and I couldn't get it on. I was trying it on. Dry suits, if you've ever been scuba diving, you know the neck seals have to be incredibly tight to keep them waterproof. So that's me in our lounge trying to shove my head through the neck seal of my new dry suit. It's loosened up a bit now after a few years. So Living Seas is actually a national thing. So of course, I'm sure you're aware that the Wildlife Trusts is a group of, I think, 46 different trusts now. And of course, I'm primarily focused on our work in Sussex, but we are working to a national picture. So nationally, we obviously want our seas to be recovering from past decline, adapting to things just like climate change, and of course, inspiring to all of those different people that are using it for whatever reason. And like I said, here we are, here in Sussex. So as you can see, we have got quite a big long stretch of coastline. I always forget how many miles it is, but I heard an interesting fact recently, which was that actually the entirety of Chichester Harbour, which is right down in the bottom, the southwest corner of Sussex, actually the length of all of that is almost as long or longer than the entirety of Sussex coastline once you consider all of the little rivers and inlets. So there you go, there's a little factoid for you there. So I wanted to start really by talking about why our seas actually matter. You know, I'm sure this group is probably you know, inherently understands why our seas are important, but sometimes it's just thinking about those fundamentals about why we should actually care. And I think I usually sort of start off with some, you know, the hard-hitting facts. I've actually turned this on its head from what I'd normally introduce. And because of the last 18 months, I think so many people have turned to the sea and the coastline for solace and, like, you know, just a place to reconnect with nature. And when we were in that position where we weren't able to go anywhere, or we were allowed out, you know, for our walk once a day, so many people were going to the seaside, going along the coast. So I wanted to highlight that, of course, we have materialistic things that we get from the sea, things that are lucrative, businesses, that kind of thing. But the sea does have, you know, just a draw, and we've got to be really conscious of the fact that we want to obviously protect it for all of those things that we can put monetary, you know, value to, but we should also not forget the just intrinsic value of having a beautiful environment that we can all enjoy. And I really think the last 18 months has really, really highlighted how important natural spaces are, and particularly those of us that are lucky enough to live near a coastline. You know, and it has been proven that being near the coast is good for your mental health, it's good for your physical health. So I think it's really important that we remember that. And I actually, like I say, wanted to put that first before I start talking about the sort of more physical aspects that we take from the sea and the coast. So of course we use the sea as a source of protein. You know, seafood is an incredibly important source of protein all around the world. There's been some interesting, some would say controversial videos going out recently on the likes of Netflix, and that talking about the sort of controversial aspects of taking fish and seafood out of the sea. And of course, you know, there are always going to be issues with things like that, but it doesn't change the fact that fundamentally it is an important source of protein, and particularly in some countries around the world, it can be their only source of protein. So it's really important that we look after that as a resource. The sea is also a source of building materials. So shingle that gets dredged out of the sea, is used in the building industry. And of course, we've got all kinds of things associated with that, with all those various infrastructures. The sea is an important source of energy. Like I said earlier, we've now got the Nepean wind farm offshore from Sussex, which is supplying us with green energy, and around other places around the UK and the world, there's new types of innovative energy production, which is based either at sea or on the coastline. And of course, this is becoming more and more important as we move, into the future. I didn't have an appropriate picture to illustrate this one, but the sea is also, it's a source of all kinds of novel technologies, but one that I find really particularly interesting is actually the fact that it's a source of medical resources, particularly the deep sea, which is beginning to be explored more and more. There's been all sorts of treatments for various, medical illnesses and ailments, which have actually been sourced out of various creatures that live in the sea. One, I think, that I find so interesting is a cone snail, which actually is incredibly poisonous if you were to be in the firing line of a cone snail underwater, but they can extract particular types of, I'm not quite sure what it is, but something that can be used medicinally and to treat cancer. So all kinds of novel things, that some of which we don't even know exist yet. So of course, all really worth protecting. And then onto the sort of the main topic at hand, really, I suppose, for tonight, which is the fact that the global ocean is a giant carbon sink, which is incredibly important with, the fact that we are now a carbon producing world, and it's becoming ever so more important. So approximately 25% of global emissions are absorbed by the ocean. Now that is on a global scale. I'm not talking about locally here. And recent figures sort of estimate that the ocean does concentrate about, approximately 50 times more carbon dioxide than the atmosphere. So it is more efficient at sort of sequestering that away and storing it. So again, not to be underestimated, the importance of making sure that it's able to do that in the best capacity possible. So it does that by two separate means, one of which is a physical carbon pump. So that's actually the physical ocean itself and the sea floor, and all of the actions associated with that, and the global kind of carbon cycle, the rain, all of that. And then you've got what we call a biological carbon pump, which is more associated with the living creatures, be that flora or fauna that are living in the sea or on the coastline. And of course, both of those together, like I say, is really quite powerful and effective. So I'm sure you're aware that climate change can have quite pertinent effects on the sea, some of which we are already beginning to see the effects of, and you see these quite shocking illustrations of what could happen in arguably quite a near future. So I kind of tried to condense it down into three main effects really that climate change is having on the sea. So of course, obviously we're going to have changes in ocean temperatures as the sea absorbs that heat that's happening in the atmosphere. And we get ocean acidification, which is all to do with carbon, and the fact that if you get more carbon sort of being absorbed by the ocean, it changes the chemistry essentially. And then you get deoxygenation of the water. So that kind of does what it says on the tin, really. You end up with a lower concentration of oxygen dissolved in the water itself. And of course, if you're a fish or a plant or any sea creature, really, they all need oxygen to live. So if you've got lower concentrations of oxygen in the water, that doesn't really bode well for animals and plants that need that oxygen to survive and thrive. So all of those three things together can have a number of different effects, but I think the most obvious is changes in sea levels, which I think a lot of people are aware of, particularly people that live on the coast. Perhaps their homes are under threat, or the local council is having to put more and more effort into sea defences, that kind of thing. We've all seen those quite terrifying maps that show where the sea level could be in 10 to 15 years. And then what we see more in terms of the actual biology of what's going on is changes in abundance, diversity, and geography of marine organisms, which mightn't sound like a big deal, but it's small changes like that that can have really big knock-on effects. So as I mentioned earlier, a lot of these issues are very much global, and it can be difficult, particularly, you know, especially when I'm sort of working within the constraints of Sussex, to understand what your role is in terms of actually helping this massive global issue. And of course, there are some small things that we as individuals or as smaller local organisations can do, some of which, you know, I'm sure you're absolutely aware of, like opting for public transport, walking, taking a bike, all of those things that we can do on a daily basis to just reduce our general consumption and our general carbon footprint in life. And of course, you can also offset your carbon footprint. There are a number of schemes these days by which you can sort of, you know, calculate what your carbon footprint is and buy into something that's going to be carbon negative. And of course, the other thing you can do is supporting efforts to understand and alleviate climate change. So there are things going on, whether that be local or whether that be on a much bigger scale. So just to finish up here, I just wanted to talk a little bit about a couple of things that we have happening within Sussex Wildlife Trust that are really quite exciting. So Shore Search is a programme that we've been running for a number of years, and essentially it's one of our citizen science projects. And what I like to describe it as is sort of basically harnessing the joy of rock pooling that maybe you experienced as a child and actually turning that into something really useful. So we take volunteers out to various places along the Sussex coastline, and we basically just record what we're finding. But when it comes to understanding climate change, what we're actually doing here is we've got climate change indicator species, which we have a specific recording program for. We've been developing it for a number of years, and it's been developed with our colleagues nationally and at other trusts all around the country. So particular species of interest that we know are moving north or south or east or west because of changes in the temperature, whether that be because there are warm water species that are now able to inhabit the UK waters, you know, perhaps they were from Europe, or perhaps they prefer the cold water and they're sort of being squeezed out of where they're able to live. So of course, us monitoring them isn't going to help alleviate anything, but it's just part of that understanding what's going on picture. And we do make all of that data that we collect available to the relevant government bodies, Natural England, the inshore fisheries and conservation authorities, in order, excuse me, for them to be able to inform management. And our data does get used. I mean, I'm not sure quite whether anything in terms of climate change policy, but certainly in terms of things like marine conservation zones and protected areas at sea and other developments. And then you may have heard that we're part of the Sussex Kelp Restoration Project, which is such an exciting project. It started really at a small level with just some of us discussing this idea of restoring the lost kelp forests over a cup of coffee, and it snowballed into this quite enormous project that David Attenborough got involved and narrated our video. I'm not trying to peddle this as a carbon project particularly. We have to be quite careful because there's a lot of information that we just simply don't know about what a restored kelp forest on the Sussex coast would actually do in terms of carbon absorption. We don't know the sort of long-term effects that would have. It's unlikely that it would be a huge piece of the puzzle in terms of absorbing carbon and sequestering it down, because we don't live next to the deep ocean. So some of the kelp forests off, say, the coast of California, they are able to sequester carbon much more efficiently because of the fact that they are situated next to the deep ocean, and the kelps have carbon within their cells, and they dry and drop into that very deep ocean and get stored. We don't have that in Sussex, but what we do know is that kelp is an incredibly important part of carbon cycling. And of course, we will see small local benefits like local oxygenation of the water. And of course, with all of that, you know, it's basically restoring a lost ecosystem, and that of course brings its own benefits. And, you know, we're not just talking about the process of carbon, but also, you know, the general ecosystem functioning and supporting local fisheries, all that kind of thing, which of course is all important in that much bigger picture. if either of those projects have piqued your interest, do feel that you can get in touch to get involved. I've actually just recorded a webinar which has just gone out this evening actually on our YouTube channel, which is about citizen science and how people can get involved in the kelp restoration project by reporting what they find. So if you are someone that lives near the coast or visits the coast of Sussex, or even out to sea, we are basically relying on citizen scientists to get involved and send us data. So please do get in touch, and I'll let you know how you can get involved with either of those programs if, like I say, that's piqued your interest. So I hope you found that interesting. And here is my email address if you would like to get in touch or send any questions. Like I say, I'm not going to stick about for the Q&A, but I'll be really happy to answer anything later via email.
Sarah, thank you so much. I just think your headline that the ocean is a giant carbon sink is just an amazing thing that gives us the ability to really understand how important the sea is in absorbing the carbon we provide. And I was certainly surprised that it is absorbing 25% of emissions globally, which was really interesting to hear. We've had some really interesting detailed questions that have come through for you during your talk, and I'll just let you know what they are and let everybody know the questions that we'll be asking you and that you'll be providing answers for. So somebody said, can you tell us a bit more about the planting scheme for the seagrass, so the kelp, and how it helps with carbon? So I think we've got somebody that's particularly interested in that level of detail, and I could have listened to you for much longer. Also asked, what are your views on the future of our sea, which is hugely important, and we'd love to hear what your views are, given your experience. And I guess potentially linked to some of these is, how are plastics in our oceans affecting the ocean? I think that's a big one, isn't it, that we see a lot in the media about, but don't necessarily understand the impact of what we see. So some information on that, if you have that, would be amazing. Lastly, I think you've got some people that would love to volunteer for you, and some people specifically, somebody asked how they could volunteer for kelp seaforestation. So if we can ask you to provide some additional information on how to volunteer for Sussex Wildlife Trust and the sorts of jobs that might be available to get involved in, that would be amazing. But I'm sure we all could have listened to you for much longer, so thank you very much for your time, and I hope you feel better.
Thank you.
And we won't hold you up, but we will very happily share all of the answers to the questions that came up during your talk.
Yeah, no problem. Well, like I said, send them to me in an email and I can either answer directly or maybe even do a little follow-up video or something if there's lots of questions. So
perfect, lovely. And it was great that you shared your email address, so if there are questions from other people listening in to the webinar that didn't type their questions in the Q&A section for us to see, then they can ask those questions.
Yeah,
which is
absolutely.
Lovely. Thank you ever so much.
Excellent.
Sarah.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Take care. Bye-bye. Fabulous. So thank you very much to Sarah. And now it is for Sir Charlie Burrell to take the stand and talk about the amazing Knepp rewilding programme, which I'm particularly interested in, and was astonished that there are over 3,000 acres of rewilding happening in West Sussex. So Charlie, if you wouldn't mind running through your presentation, that would be great.
Good evening, everyone. Sarah is brilliant because I was tasked by Sally to talk a little bit about Knepp, but also to actually think about connecting our landscape with the sea. So it's sort of perfectly segue from Sarah into what I'm going to talk about. But I thought I'd talk about, first of all, is Knepp and what Knepp is for those that haven't come across it before. So you have some sort of idea of what we're doing here. I put up this first slide, and this is the first outing of this particular Wheel to Waves project. So I'm going to talk probably mainly about the Wheel to Waves project, which is connecting Knepp to the sea, and Knepp also to Ashdown Forest through corridors. And I'm going to describe a little bit about corridors and how I see they could function, and also how the government is thinking about all this, and how the sort of direction of travel is all about a restoration of nature in our landscapes. I shall start. Let's see if this works. That's Lisa, that's all looking good, is it? You can see.
Yeah, it looks perfect from my
Good.
end.
Okay. Knepp sits just south of Horsham on the A24, A272 crossroads. It's 320 meters of clay cap over a bedrock of limestone. So we're in the low weald. So you've got south of us, obviously, the South Downs, and then north of us, you've got the North Downs. But we're squeezed between sort of Southwater, Worthing, Brighton, that sort of area. So you can see where we are there. The land is poor agricultural land. It's grade 3, grade 4 agricultural land. It has tiny little fields. So the 3,500 acres, they will split up into little tiny fields of 10 acres each. And we were going through a real heavy review back in 2000, or a little bit earlier than 2000, about what we were going to do. And one of the things that I got really interested in, it was mentioned in my introduction from Lisa, is this particular book, and also the man behind the book. And this is Grazing Ecology and Forest History by Franz Vera, and it's a hypothesis of how ecology functions in Europe. That particular book set a fire under the pants of a whole load of academics in Europe, and people got very excited by what they were hearing and seeing from Franz Vera's hypothesis. And 20 years on, he has changed the face of how we think ecology functions and works within certainly temperate zone Europe. So a really important figure, and I was really intrigued by what he was saying, and decided that we might explore some of his ideas. Part of his thinking is that we have written out the drivers of ecosystems, and the drivers for him are herbivores, large herbivores, this megafauna. I know the rabbit's not a megafauna, but the rest of these animals are megafauna. What we decided to do was to choose a whole load of these animals to drive a system. So we chose a Tamworth pig because we couldn't put a wild boar into the system. Wild boar are a dangerous part of the Dangerous Wild Animals Act and can't be used where people are involved. This is a keystone species. This is an animal that's given us the biggest population of purple-emperor butterflies in the country. It's given us the turtle dove, and the only growing population of turtle dove in this region. So a really important creature for our project. We then have the heavy hitters, the browsers, the red deer and the fallow deer and the roe deer. And these are also incredibly important to stop this land on Knepp reverting to a closed canopy woodland, which is very shady and doesn't have very many species associated with it. You're wanting scrubland and trees forming and so on. The Exmoor pony, that's got a single stomach, it's got teeth on the top, it's got a different way of herding, it's got a different, they carry different diseases in their mouthpieces from plant to plant. All of these animals are giving different traits to this landscape. They are driving new habitats for the future. Old English Longhorns. These cattle, this old breed of cattle, they aren't the sort of animal that goes straight to to the grasses and just eat grasses. They're very happy eating a whole load of different things. But if you imagine that these plants and the interaction between plants and animals is so important. Cattle are known to carry up to 230 different plant species in their gut, on their fur, in their hooves, just moving around a landscape, disturbing, moving plants, the way that they eat, the way they function, gives you different outcomes in the habitats of the future. So really important animals. Also, you have the meat coming off this site, so you have also that as a byproduct of the whole project. Bull pits are really important for certain plant species, for instance. This bull is digging a hole in the ground. The reason, I guess, we have become quite famous in the conservation world and maybe beyond is that we've had huge success in bringing back life. Tony here, who's sitting in the middle here, holding a small bird in hand, he's showing, and some birds here, and he's been netting birds with a group of birders, and they've been ringing them, and they're showing off to a group of tourists looking at what they've been up to. Tony's been ringing birds for 30 years, and this is a lesser whitethroat, and this is a blackcap. And if you count up the birds that he was catching when this picture was taken, for the 2.5 weeks that he was ringing, he caught more of those two species in those 2.5 weeks on one field on Knepp than he had totaling up his entire 30 years of catching birds. So the numbers of migratory birds coming through our landscape is enormous, but also this team and some more found in 2018 as well, they did this thing called a common bird census, and they looked for breeding territories of birds in this landscape, in this scrubby landscape that you can see in the back here. They found that there was such huge quantities that it may be one of the highest densities of breeding songbirds in Britain. And that's after 16 years. And I guess one of the things that really has made Knepp stick out in the crowd is that it really has this positive story that you can actually do something in a very short period of time. And to get to the point when you're one of the top breeding sites for birds gives you an indication of how nature can recover. And that's hugely hopeful. I'm now going to talk about nature recovery networks. And this is one of the bits of legislation that's coming through and is now being talked about a lot, about how we're going to recover our landscapes for nature. The government is calling for 30% of our land to be nature, either not dedicated to nature, but certainly nature friendly, and some of it protected. Maybe 10% of that completely protected for nature. So there's all the 25-year environment bill is going through the process of being going through the statutory process. And we're coming out the other end with maybe some really quite exciting things to think about and how we're going to recover nature. This is an image of Knepp in the spring, showing off its blossom. And you can see all this browsed landscape below. It's very, very beautiful. I'm going to come back to this particular picture, but I'm just nature recovery networks. This is one version of it, but the Wildlife Trust has come up with a whole lot of thinking behind this for probably nearly 20 years. I mean, Tony Whitbread came up with the similar sorts of ideas and visions as Franz Vera did in the mid 80s. And Tony was he's now retired from being the chief exec of the Sussex Wildlife Trust, but he was coming up with these ideas long time ago. So I'm really just going to repeat the sorts of things that he's been telling me about. The idea behind these networks and this recovery is really been stamped into government thinking by the Lawton report. Professor Sir John Lawton and his colleagues were asked to look at coming up with a document for government in 2012, which was talking about how we were going to allow more space for nature. And one of the sorts of thinking that John took from the Wildlife Trust and people like Tony was these ideas of linear corridors. Here's a linear corridor. Buffer zones around areas where you've got high nature worth areas. Stepping stones where you have little pockets of high nature worth, and having them between two bigger areas is really important. Then having core areas where you can really protect nature so that it actually is functioning more and more on its own, big enough areas to really function well. And then you can have landscape corridors. So these are permeable landscapes where you've got very much friendly farming systems that are looking at nature as part of their outputs. And then areas like the rewilding at Knepp, where you can restore a restoration area. So that's a sort of that's a sort of conceptual idea of what I'm going to talk about now. But why? Why are we all talking about this? I just thought it'd be interesting to just demonstrate a little bit about what we're thinking is going to happen with climate change and climate heating. This is this is based on the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's. They've split the world has been split up into climate zones, and this is one climate zone here, and it moves and changes differently from other climate zones on the planet, depending on where you are, latitude and longitude and so on. This particular climate zone is anticipated to move with climate heating at 150 kilometers a degree, or 150 meters upwards. So I wanted to sort of demonstrate what that actually looked like, what it meant. And so I then thought, well, okay, I'll draw this little map up, and here's southern France now arriving in southern Britain. Now this is, and then southern Britain going up to Scotland. Now this is based on 3.2 degree rise. At the moment, we, as you probably know, COP is trying to keep us within the 1.5 Paris Agreement, but that's already thought to be too late. We are looking at a much higher level of increase, and some of the predictions are as high as 3.8 degrees and rise by the end of the century. So this movement of temperature is partly what we're talking about here. If we do nothing in Britain in terms of corridors, stepping stones, and linear connections, we are, again, according to the IPCC's modeling, we are looking at a 56% loss in our species, 56% loss if we do nothing with this sort of radical climate change and climate heating. One of the things that it's always difficult to visualize is what we're talking about, these linear corridors. And I'm going to just show you a couple of slides about that, because I wanted to sort of picture what that actually meant. And here is a climate corridor, a linear corridor that is going through this landscape to a high nature high worth area here, and another high nature worth area here. And here is your physical connection. But instantly you see there's problems. There's problems with the fact that we've got things in the way, like an A road or a motorway. So we've got to think about how we can reconnect these linear corridors. And this is the importance of this is really for things that can't fly, will have to be moved by animals. Small plants, big plants, these are all the things that need to have this physical connection, as well as the bigger animals, the megafauna. They also need to have this physical connection. But it's not only about those corridors, it's a whole raft of things that we're going to have to restore. We're going to have to restore our soils. We're going to have to think about regenerative agriculture as one of our main drivers to restore soils. We're going to have to allow our wetlands to become functioning wetlands again. We're going to have to reconnect this landscape up. We're going to have to think carefully of how we're going to let trees back into this landscape. This is all really important stuff that is in the environmental bill coming up. So I've got huge hope that this next 20-25 years, we can see some really major changes in allowing nature back in our lives and allowing more space for nature, that 30% space for nature. One of the things you've got to then do is you've got to, drawing up these maps and these ideas, is you've got to do a whole load of work, and you've got to work out how landscapes function. So you've got to look at all the soils, you've got to look at all the pathways that are existing, where the fragmentation is happening, and all the rest of it. This is some work that again, the Horsham District Council commissioned from the Wildlife Trust, and it was to look at the Horsham district. So Crawley is just in the top right-hand corner. So just looking at our district and how we're going to plan to reconnect our landscapes. So based on the river systems, you're then looking at the existing hotspots for nature. And this is Knepp sitting in the middle here. And then you've got the areas that have got high habitat potential, where we can do some things to make it even better. And we can then start to see that you're using sort of corridors and pathways and hills and a whole load of other things that you can then start to connect those hotspots of nature up. You then need to perhaps make those linear corridors along rivers and so on join up as well. So you keep on thinking about what the potential is and how you can then keep on joining things up. One of the things for the project Wheel to Waves is that we have got a partnership with Arup, and Arup have been just given an award in 2020 for some work they did in another part of Britain. And we've had this incredible journey with them, and they're amazing group of people. And they're coming up pro bono work, coming up with some ideas and interpretations and so on for us about how we're going to actually reconnect landscapes up. They're an engineering firm, so they know how to build bridges, they know how to bridge the gaps and so on. The Wheel to the Waves, this is the first time anyone's seen this. We haven't launched it yet. In fact, we're launching it with you. And it's a farmer-led, landowner-led initiative with the Wildlife Trust and with the South Downs National Park and a whole lot of other NGOs being part of the idea. But the idea is we need to start with the farmer and the landowner who own the land. And we need to get them galvanized and actually making change. And if you get buy-in from people that are actually running and organizing the land, then you can get a long way. Just at the last slide, this is the beginning of it. So we've been hearing about the Sussex Bay project, the Kelp Project here. And this is really interesting because we were the excitement of having 4 kilometers out from the sea, the cessation of dredging and trawling, and the kelp allowed to come back and reseeding this area with kelp gives us a real opportunity to think about how that revitalized fishery, that revitalized seabed, that benthic layer that's got kelp everywhere, can then feed into the terrestrial corridor. We have this extraordinary farm and farmer down in the Climping Gap between Bognor Regis and Littlehampton. And they are talking about a whole lot of exciting ideas of how to connect their land with this new kelp forest that will be coming. And with that, we are then talking to landowners all the way through this landscape, all the way over to Ashdown Forest, about 50 miles is what we're talking about. And we're talking to all these people and about coming together and thinking about nature recovery area or nature recovery in a grand scale. And we've brought together about 150,000 acres in a couple of meetings now. And the excitement that we are getting is palpable. It's really, really thrilling. One of the complications, as you're all too aware, is there's lots of other layers that are going to affect this. And one of the, I just snatched this from Sally's website, and one of the things that is really affecting all of this is pollution, noise, and so on, and people, numbers of people having to live in this area or not having to live, living in this area. We've been immensely lucky here at Knepp. In the last 2 years, we've had filming on Knepp during lockdown, and that's nature filming. And we've had 3 films made by Silverback Productions, and 2 of those were with David Attenborough. We've had this quiet spell where we haven't had the noise of jets flying over us. And that's been a huge privilege to be able to have that time with these filming companies and the production productions they're doing. But there is obviously travel about to happen again in big scale, and the thought of a second runway and the increasing of the scale that Sally and her team are talking about is just appalling to think about. I guess my excitement from all of this is tempered by what else is happening in Sussex. But we've got to be positive, and we've got to think that we can manage to get out the other side. And I'm guessing that all of you who have been supporting this Gatwick movement has still got some puff in you, and we can still carry on pouring a bit of money into the guys that are really making a difference and holding back this appalling prospect of another runway. I'm going to hand back to Lisa now.
Thank you,
Wait
Charlie.
for questions.
We've got a lot of questions for you. That was absolutely fascinating, and I would love to talk to you and hear more about that. But we've got some really key questions, and if we run out of time for questions, I would ask if we could email you the remaining questions as well, like we're going to do with Sarah. But I'll kick off and see how many we can get through. So being astonished at how much change has happened at Knepp in a relatively short period of time, was change on this scale expected within that time scale?
Not for me. I think I put together a group of 20 to 25 ecologists from around Europe. And I think some of them thought it was going to happen. But for me, I had no idea. I mean, where I went to go and see nature was, jetting off from Gatwick to Africa or to Australia, or and so for me, the recovery was extraordinary, and I'm still, I get that feeling every day that I wake up. We've got a lovely team of people, and because Knepp's become so famous, there's a lot of people that come and do a lot of work here, so study stuff. And so we find new species to Britain every year. We find new species to Sussex, definitely every year. And the whole thing just keeps on building and building and building. And that is astonishing.
Amazing. And you mentioned a 30% figure for nature. I'm assuming you mean globally or within the UK. But where did that sort of 30% figure come from, of wanting to have nature in that 30%?
E.O. Wilson has called for, I'm sure that a lot of you will have read and heard about E.O. Wilson's work, an American scientist. He calls for half Earth. But there's been this move since Brexit that it's sort of like a slightly competitive thing with Europe, isn't it? And so we came up with this 30%. That it was ridiculed when the Prime Minister said, well, we've only got another 4% to go, because he counted all the sort of national parks, and he counted up all the SSSIs and so on, and he came up with that 26% is already protected and already looked after. As you all know, national parks are owned by people. They're not just for nature, they're mostly for actual production of farming goods. So the 30% was a figure that I think probably was plucked out of the air, but it's now become something. Europe followed up with a document only last year, which was 30% protected areas and 10% no take zones, and that was both marine and terrestrial. So there's been a big move to think about how we're going to give more space to nature within our farmed landscape.
And I think one of the questions that have come up is, I think people will be very interested about that map that you put up around and layering up around the Horsham draft NRN. But I think we're keen to understand, how does that link with all the building plans around Horsham and the mass building on the proposals around quite large scale building, specifically around some of your Knepp areas, and how does Horsham tally that really with the plans for housing versus their desire to work in this way with you?
Well, I can hear that's someone who knows that we are threatened with a 3,500 house new town on our boundary. And that also threatens one of the identified nature corridors that the Sussex Wildlife Trusts put on their map. So I guess at this stage, we don't know. We don't know how that's going to be protected. We don't know if it will be protected. I know that today Michael Gove has come up with a statement about the need to protect our corridors, and so one hopes that we see sense and we see where those we need that top-down overview of whole systems. We really need to plan and not just chuck in whole new towns because it just suits us for a number of reasons, but not all reasons. And I think we have to remember that nature is part of the reasoning that we have to go through to work out how we behave and how we structure our future.
Absolutely. Maybe just one or two last quick questions, Charlie. We had a lot of questions for you. Do you allow natural breeding, or is your breeding planned for the animals on your land?
We remove bulls from in the autumn and put bulls in the spring, but we have multiple bulls per block. So there's 3 blocks, and you have 6 bulls per block, and they're just allowed to roam free for the summer. So we have some sort of control, but we don't monitor which bull covers what animal.
Okay.
But on all the other animals, they just got the males running free with them.
Oh, okay. So the horses and the etc. are just left to do their own thing. Yeah, brilliant, lovely. Well, we had a good few more questions for you, and I'll just read a couple of them out, and then maybe we can share some answers with people. But your stalks have made headlines in the media, and more generally, are birds and wildlife affected by noise and artificial light, which I guess we all know the answer is going to be yes, and that's part of the reasons that we're so worried about the building, etc. But a little bit more information on that would be amazing. Somebody specifically asked about owls at Knepp, which would be interesting to hear about, and I didn't get to ask. Sorry,
all 5 species.
Wow, that's amazing. And I didn't quite get to ask my question, which was, you've done so much change at Knepp. How are you going to secure the long-term impact of Knepp for generations to come? But I'm sure you could talk about that for hours. But it'd be lovely to hear about your plans to make sure that your.
It's the first time in my lifetime that Knepp is sustainable. The financial stability of the estate is now secure.
Wow, brilliant, amazing.
We've gone from 23 people to 49 people employed. Brilliant.
Well, I loved hearing about Knepp, Charlie, and I'm sure everybody else did. And thank you very much for the sneak preview of Will to Waves. We feel very privileged to be the first people to hear about that. And I think it just clearly identifies the impact that an individual landowner can have, no matter how much land they own, because it's coming together that is the important element of that. And I think Sarah spoke about what we can all do to start offsetting some of our carbon footprint as well, which was really, really interesting. And I guess you know, I know, and everybody here knows about the impact of G2 and Gatwick Airport plans. And I guess, you know, that's why we're here, is to hear about the special projects that are trying to help globally, and what we can do individually to help, but also to remind everybody and encourage people to take action around G2 and get their voices heard. And one last question that I've seen that come up is, which is really interesting, is will Knepp be providing a flyer so we can hand it out to landowners to encourage them to join your initiative? So I think that just shows how much you've grabbed people's attention and the impact that this can have. So if there is any more information that you can share, maybe for landowners that might not have hit your radar because of the size of their land, for example, I think people would love to hear about that. I think it's fair to say you really have sparked everybody's love for wildlife and what we can do for the natural world. And I love the concept of green bridges and making that corridor from the Weald to the Wave. So that's really heartening and very inspiring. So thank you very much for that. I'm not going to take up too much more time, but I am going to hand over back to Sally just for some closing remarks from her to make sure that everybody's completely up to date with Cagney work and where we're going next. So thank you very much.
Thank you all very, very much. A really inspiring and really interesting evening. So thank you to Sarah, and we will write to Sarah afterwards to thank her. Thank you, Lisa, for chairing this evening, and a big thank you to you, Charlie, for joining us, and for a really fascinating insight into your work and to Knepp. It just leaves me to hope that everyone attending this evening will participate in the Gatwick Airport second runway consultation. It runs till the 1st of December. Everybody needs to have a say in this. This is your one-off opportunity to say you either support or you strongly oppose a second runway at Gatwick. It does have huge ramifications, and the second runway, if used as proposed by Gatwick, will add 1 to 1.5 million tonnes of carbon every year, on top of what they already produce from the main runway. So that is a huge amount of carbon, and you will have the similar size amount of greenhouse gases as well from a second runway. So for us at the moment, we are asking for constraint. We don't feel it's the right time. We don't feel that aviation is a green industry in the true sense of a green. And so we're following the Committee on Climate Change in asking for constraint on airport expansion, all airport expansion, but obviously in particular for us in Sussex, Surrey and Kent, on Gatwick Airport. So please participate and have your say. Gatwick will then go to the government through a planning process called a development consent order, we believe early next year. Obviously Cagney is raising funds to make sure we have a barrister and experts to counter Gatwick's claims on a number of topics, and one of them obviously key for us is our natural world. So our next talk is on the 7th of October. It's question time. It's a new talk, asking you to send in questions for Gatwick Airport. We finally got them to agree to come and take your questions. We will also have Aviation Environment Federation there and Friends of the Earth. So please get your questions into us, or you can book online. I have put the address in the chat room. Otherwise, we will be emailing out tomorrow details of that. And on the 21st, another virtual talk in, and time is ticking, is with Dr. Gary Fuller, who did research on the air particles from Gatwick airfields and the air particles from the M23. It makes very interesting listening to, but also very worrying listening to if you are living near Gatwick Airport, or if you live in London, because that's where the majority of the wind blows, is London direction. So Sadiq Khan, who's supporting Gatwick too, better watch out. But on a different note, I'd like to thank everybody for attending this evening. Without you, Cagney would not exist. Without our membership, Cagney would not exist. We're all volunteers, and we need your support to oppose Gatwick too. So please do go to our website, and please do donate whatever you can afford. Much appreciated at this time. That closes out our event this evening. So thank you very much. Look forward to seeing you again. Please send us email via our email address. I think Lisa's itching just to say one more word.
Just wanted to say one more thing. Charlie, I know that Knepp is open to the public, and I'm not sure everybody potentially knew that. So it might just be worth telling people that they can actually come and visit.
Luckily, it's now becoming the winter, and they shouldn't come. I think we found 36 single shoes on our footpaths after last winter.
So maybe not the best time to start visiting.
yeah, probably not.
It's probably one of mine.
We have done a lot of work on the green way, so there is actually a new path being built. But generally, walking around the Weald in the rain and the wet is not such a good idea.
So perhaps next spring, book one of your safari tours in the spring
instead. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so thank you very much, and I'm going to say good evening and goodbye.